My name is Elaine Morris. I'm 62 years old, and on the day I found out my son's wedding wasn't for me, it nearly broke something inside me. I'd given this boy everything, my time, my youth, my heart, and yet there I was, holding a printed guest list in my hands like a stranger, realizing I was just a name to be crossed off. That's when the pride drained out of me, replaced by something darker, something stronger. It had all started 6 months earlier when Matthew announced his engagement to Danielle, a bright, polished picture, perfect woman whose smile never reached her eyes. I tried to be open. I tried to be warm, but from the start, she treated me like a relic from a life she wanted him to shed. Still, I kept my mouth shut. I told myself, this is his choice, his future, you'll find your place. I made myself believe that lie. Right up until I opened the email, it was a forwarded message from my cousin Linda, who got her invite before I did. Elaine, I thought you'd be listed under family, maybe it's just an oversight. I clicked open the attachment. It was all there, color, coded seating charts, RSVP checklists, vendor notes, and there in black and white was a nightmare I wasn't prepared for. I wasn't listed as mother of the groom. I wasn't even on the main table. I was on table 18, far corner, next to people I'd never even met. And worse, Danielle's family had 2 entire tables up front. Her third cousins were above me in rank. People who didn't even know Matt when he was struggling through his first heartbreak, when I stayed up with him all night crying, baking brownies just to make him smile again. I sat in my kitchen for over an hour, just staring at that screen. I felt like someone had taken a knife and carved me out of my own son's life. Pride, gone. Excitement, burned. What replaced it was humiliation and a rising tide of cold fury, but I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to see for myself, so I played the role, smiling, polite, the mother who just wanted her son to be happy. I asked gentle questions about the ceremony, the traditions, the guest count. Every answer Matthew gave felt rehearsed, distant, like he was handling a customer, not speaking to his mother. And Danielle, she sat in the background with her manicured fingers laced and that smug, knowing smirk on her lips like she'd already won. I realized I had been pushed into a corner long before this wedding ever started. It was the little things I began to notice. My suggestions for readings, dismissed. My dress color, just coordinate with the table linens, Mom. We don't want you to stand out. Stand out. I was the mother of the groom, or so I thought. I went home that night and sat in my living room under the dim lamp, flipping through photo albums. I looked at pictures of Matthew's kindergarten graduation, his baseball games, prom, every stage of his life. I'd been right there on the front row, clapping the loudest, loving the hardest, and now I was nothing but an afterthought to be seated behind strangers and asked to keep it low. Something snapped in me, but not in a loud, explosive way. It was quieter, colder, more dangerous. I didn't cry. I planned. I went back to that guest list and started reading between the lines. Who was invited? Who wasn't? I looked at seating arrangements like a general studies a battlefield. I memorized names, faces, relationships. I started listening closer in conversations, smiling while noting every time Danielle's name came up in relation to money, favors, drama. I paid attention like never before. And I waited. They thought I was fading into the background, but I was doing the opposite. I was sharpening, preparing, gathering every ounce of disappointment and turning it into strategy. You see, revenge doesn't come from rage. Not real revenge. It comes from grief, and nothing hurts like being erased by the one you created. The final blow in this chapter came when Danielle's mother sent out a social media post that read, "Can't wait to watch my daughter marry the man of her dreams. We raised him well." She had never raised him. She wasn't there when I worked double shifts to buy his soccer cleats. She wasn't there when his father walked out and I held it together for the both of us. But now, because she had money and connections, she got credit for the man I had raised. I bookmarked that post. I saved everything, because when the day came that they would all sit in one room, smiling, drinking, pretending everything was perfect, I would be ready. They had forgotten who I was. But they were about to remember. I wish I could say that was the worst of it being hidden on a spreadsheet and sat like an afterthought. But it was just the beginning, because once I saw where I stood on that guest list, I started seeing everything more clearly. Not just the table assignments, not just the fake smiles, but the truth. My son wasn't my son anymore. Danielle had taken him, piece by piece, and replaced everything good and real in him with something shiny, shallow, and cold. He used to call me every Sunday like clockwork. We'd talk about life, food, work. He'd ask me for advice, sometimes even just to hear my voice. But after they got engaged, those calls turned into short, distracted check-in. I'd ask how he was, and he'd say, busy. You know how it is. Then came the missed birthdays, the forgotten Mother's Day lunch, the oh, sorry, Danielle already booked us for that weekend. Always Danielle. Always her plans, her schedule, her control. She changed him, but it didn't happen all at once. That's what made it so cruel. At first, I thought he was just adapting, settling in, that maybe he was just trying to keep the peace between two strong women. But then came the shift in his tone, the way he'd cut me off mid-sentence or say, Mom, please don't start. When I hadn't even said anything yet, it was subtle, but it was deadly. It felt like I was losing him to slow poison. I still remember the night it all clicked for me when I realized I wasn't just being sidelined. I was being erased. We were at a pre-wedding planning dinner at Danielle's parents' home, their sprawling estate with gold-trimmed wallpaper and champagne fountains and waitstaff who looked at me like I didn't belong. I wore a simple navy blue dress I had saved for months to buy, thinking it was elegant. Danielle's mother, Brenda, glanced at me once and said, "Oh, that's brave." Like I had shown up in rags. Danielle barely looked at me. When she did, it was only to correct something. Actually, Elaine, we're not doing a blessing at the ceremony. It feels a little dated. Or I don't think we need the photo montage, it's too long. And people don't know most of those people anyway. Most of those people were my family, my late sister, his father's side, his roots. Matthew didn't defend me once. Not once. He just sat there, nodding along, sipping from his imported wine glass like a trained guest. Like he didn't even hear the humiliation washing over me in waves. I tried to meet his eyes. I thought, maybe he'll see it. Maybe he'll realize I'm hurting. But he wouldn't even look at me. He was too busy watching Danielle. She had become his compass, his handler, his world, and I was just noise. I helped raise that boy with bare hands and sleepless nights. I stitched his Halloween costumes. I took on second jobs when his tuition came due. I gave up every piece of comfort so he could have a shot at something better. But now that he had better, he acted like I came with strings he didn't want to remember. One night, I showed up at his condo, unannounced, something I hadn't done in years, just to talk. Just to see if maybe I was imagining all this. Maybe we were just going through a phase. He opened the door halfway, looked behind him like he was afraid I might embarrass him, and said, "Mom, now's not a good time. Danielle's got a thing later and she's getting ready." I told him, "I raised you. I deserve 5 minutes." He sighed like it was a burden and let me in. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt it in my bones. This wasn't my son's place. It was hers. White rugs mirrored furniture, photos of her and her family on every wall. Not one of us. Not even a baby picture. She came out of the bedroom 5 minutes later, all perfect makeup and artificial charm, and said with syrupy disdain, "Oh, Elaine, I didn't know you were coming. Next time, just shoot us a text, okay? We're super slammed this week." That us made my stomach turn. Matthew just stood there, silent, weak. I said, "I just came to remind you where you come from, who you are, that's all." And Danielle, I'll never forget this, said with a smirk, "Oh, we know who Matt is. That's why he's not stuck in the past like some people." She didn't have to say it. I knew she meant me. I left that condo with my pride shattered, my heart bruised, and one truth echoing in my mind. Danielle hadn't just changed my son, she'd taken him, and he let her. But I also walked away with a new kind of clarity. If I couldn't speak to my son as a mother anymore, then I would speak to him as a woman who had been wronged, and I would not speak with a whisper. I stopped trying to fit into their world. I started collecting everything they'd tried to hide. I leaned into the shadows they pushed me toward. I started remembering names, conversations, timing. I opened up an old notebook and started writing it all down, because the best way to fight someone who erased you is to make yourself unforgettable. And they were going to remember me not as the woman they pushed aside, but as the one who brought their entire performance crashing down. One truth, one microphone, one perfect moment, but first I had to wait. I had to watch, and I had to know everything. The day of the rehearsal dinner arrived like a storm you hear coming, but pretend won't hit you. I had spent the entire morning staring at the outfit I'd bought weeks ago. An elegant, pale gray dress with soft embroidery along the neckline, something that made me feel like I still belonged in a room full of people who now looked at me like I didn't matter. I wore it anyway, not for them, but for the woman I used to be, before the silence, before the rejection, before the betrayal by my own child. The dinner was held at a high-end country club just outside the city, all white columns and glass chandeliers and people who spoke in polite cruelty. I pulled into the valet line behind two BMW and stepped out of my aging Toyota with as much dignity as I could muster. The valet didn't even open my door. He just stared at me, bored, waiting, like I was already out of place. Inside, the air was thick with perfume, laughter, and lies. Danielle's family had already gathered near the open bar. Her mother, Brenda, was holding court with a wine glass in hand and that permanently pinched expression that made her look like she'd smelled something rotten. When she saw me, she smiled, but it was the kind of smile that cuts. "Elaine, how lovely you look. So simple, understated." I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. Matthew found me a few minutes later, hugged me without even making eye contact, and whispered, "Glad you could make it, Mom. Just try to keep things smooth tonight, okay? Danielle's already on edge. I was the one being squeezed out of my son's life like a stain they couldn't quite scrub out. But apparently, her nerves took precedence. Her feelings were now sacred ground, mine disposable. The seating arrangements for the dinner mirrored the wedding reception, which I hadn't seen until that very moment. I was placed between two of Danielle's great uncles I'd never met, while her college roommate, an old piano teacher, sat closer to the couple than I did. Across the room, Brenda had her hand resting proudly on Matthew's arm, posing for photo after photo like she had raised him. Danielle's father toasted the joining of two wonderful families, and when he gestured around the room, his hand swept past me like I wasn't even there. But what broke me wasn't the seating. It wasn't even the speeches. It was the cake. Danielle had arranged for a rehearsal cake to be brought out, a fun little preview of the real wedding centerpiece. As the servers wheeled it in, the lights dimmed and a slideshow began playing on the projector behind them. Pictures of Danielle as a child, Danielle with her family, Danielle at prom in college with Matthew. Picture after picture, smiling, glowing, not one photo of Matthew's childhood, not one photo of us, not one picture that showed I had ever existed in his life before her. I felt my chest tighten as people laughed, clapped, and wiped tears. Tears for her memories, her family, her story. I looked over at Matthew. He was smiling, and that's when it happened. Danielle stood up to give her little speech. A toast, she said, to the man who changed everything for me, to the mother who raised such a wonderful son. I straightened in my seat, stunned. Maybe, just maybe, and then she finished. "Brenda, thank you for being the woman who shaped the man I get to marry." The room applauded. Brenda stood up, beaming. I sat there frozen, completely still. My ears rang. My fingers dug into the linen napkin until it tore. My son didn't even blink. No correction. No hesitation. No, actually, that's not my mom. He let her erase me. In front of everyone. When the applause died down, I stood up. I didn't make a scene. I didn't yell. I simply excused myself to the bathroom and walked out the front doors into the parking lot. The night air hit me like a slap. I stumbled to my car, breathing hard, my chest burning with a heat I couldn't describe. I sat behind the wheel and screamed, not words, just pain, raw, hoarse, shaking pain that rose from the bottom of my soul. I had been erased, not quietly, not behind closed doors, but publicly, like a stain they wanted scrubbed out of their perfect wedding day. My sacrifices, my tears, my love all reduced to a mistake they didn't want anyone to see. But while I sat there shaking, a new feeling crept in beneath the grief, something steel, hard, something cold. They thought that moment would be my breaking point, and it was, but not the way they expected. It didn't break me into pieces. It broke me open. I wiped my tears, grabbed my phone, and began scrolling through my saved screenshots. The post where Brenda claimed credit for raising my son. The guest list with my name tucked in the back. The family photos with me cropped out, and most importantly, the financial lies I had started uncovering in whispers and offhanded comments. There was something there, something real, something dangerous. A week earlier, Danielle's great-aunt had pulled me aside and said something that didn't sit right with me at the time. "I just hope this marriage isn't about appearances, dear. So many secrets in this family. But you didn't hear that from me." That sentence came back to me like thunder. No one had noticed me in that room. No one had expected me to pay attention, so they spoke freely, carelessly, as if I didn't exist, and that would be their downfall. I drove home that night with a plan forming in my mind. Not revenge in the way they expected, not some petty disruption. No, I would give them what they wanted. Silence, obedience, a quiet little woman in a plain gray dress. I'd sit in the front row like a ghost, smiling like nothing was wrong. Until the moment they handed me a microphone, and then I would set fire to the lies they built their whole wedding on, in front of 200 people. Danielle's words still echoed in my ears the next morning, the echo of laughter and applause still haunting my dreams. But nothing stuck deeper than the phrase my own son muttered as we walked out of that rehearsal dinner. "Just stay in your lane, Mom." That was it. No apology for letting Danielle hand my motherhood to Brenda like a party favor. No explanation for cutting me out of every decision. Just that one sentence, said with the flat tone of someone who was done pretending he cared what I thought. Stay in your lane, as if the woman who raised him had no place in the story of his wedding. As if the 27 years I gave him, years filled with sacrifice, scraped knees, broken bones hard, earned degrees, and the quiet way I clapped the loudest from the shadows, meant nothing, just a lane. A line, a border I was no longer allowed to cross, so I smiled. I smiled, nodded, and told him, "You're right," because what he didn't realize was that my lane was the one they were about to crash into. I stopped calling after that night. I stopped texting. I didn't offer any more help, advice, or input. Danielle must have thought she won. Brenda must have smirked behind closed doors. Maybe they whispered about how gracefully I'd stepped aside, how mature I was being now that they had full control of the narrative. What they didn't realize was that while they were busy polishing the surface, I was peeling back the layers, and what I found underneath was rot. It started with a quiet conversation. Danielle's cousin, Chelsea, came to me during the rehearsal dinner. She was younger, maybe in her 20s, and clearly didn't fit the country club mold. She waited until no one was around and muttered, "I don't agree with any of this. I don't know why they treat you like this. You deserve better." That's all she said, but it was enough. I followed up with her through social media. Slowly, gently, I asked questions, listened, and she began opening up. That's how I learned about Danielle's first engagement. Yes, first. A quiet family scandal that had been buried under a pile of NDA and threats. A wealthy man, older, who broke off the engagement after finding out about Danielle's financial manipulation and fake pregnancy scare. The family spun it as a tragic breakup, but whispers in the extended circle knew better. Then came the money trail. Matthew had confided in me once, early on in their relationship, that he had dipped into his savings to help Danielle settle a few debts. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But after speaking to Chelsea, I realized those debts were not accidental. They were part of a pattern, a series of manipulations Danielle had pulled on past boyfriends and even a former employer, who, according to court records I quietly pulled, sued her for embezzlement. It had been quietly dismissed, settled out of court, but I had screenshots, documents, proof. Still, I said nothing. I waited, because the perfect revenge isn't loud, it's precise. I let Danielle and Brenda continue planning their fairy tale. I let them think I was shrinking. They never once asked if I was okay. never once reached out to see how I felt after being humiliated. Matthew didn't even check in. He sent a generic "hope you're good" text 2 days before the wedding. I didn't reply, I just prepared. I spent the next week mapping out the guest list like a general planning an ambush. I knew who would be there. I knew which friends and family members adored Danielle and which had suspicions but never voiced them. I also knew how powerful truth becomes when spoken at the right time, to the right people, in the right tone. The day before the wedding, I got a call from Brenda. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the best of me. "Elaine," she said, sweet as poison, "I just wanted to remind you about the timing tomorrow. We're having all the important family photos taken before the ceremony. You're welcome to be in the background shots, but we're mostly focusing on the immediate family. The immediate family." I was Matthew's mother, not invited for portraits, not wanted in front, just background shots. I calmly told her, of course, "I'll stay in my lane." She chuckled. "That's all we ask." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the mirror. That was the moment I knew I was done grieving. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't desperate to be included. I wasn't hoping for an apology that would never come. I was ready. I pulled out the soft blue folder I'd been building for weeks. Inside, printouts of Danielle's sealed lawsuit screenshots of her deleted posts, bragging about getting what she wants from men. A photo of her with her ex-fiancé, time-stamped during her relationship with Matthew, a typed timeline, listing every major lie and manipulation, and finally, at the bottom, a single printed speech. It was short, elegant, truthful, and if the microphone found its way into my hand, I'd deliver it calmly, with dignity, with the clarity of a mother scorned, but not broken, because I had stayed in my lane, and now my lane led straight through their wedding like a wrecking ball. The dress I wore to the wedding was deep emerald silk. Not loud, not showy, but it shimmered under the lights, just enough to remind them I still had presence. I took my seat in the front row without asking. Without checking, I simply sat down. Danielle glanced at me as she walked down the aisle. Her smile faltered for a second, just 1 second. She knew something had changed, and I smiled right back. Secrets hide in plain sight when people think you're irrelevant. That's what Danielle and Brenda never understood. They were so focused on pushing me aside, so obsessed with curating their perfect wedding image, that they never once looked over their shoulders to check if I was listening. And because of that, I heard everything. At first, the signs were small, comments that didn't line up, dates that shifted in Danielle's stories, money that disappeared from Matthew's account without explanation. But I didn't want to believe it, not because I trusted her, but because I still wanted to believe my son wouldn't let himself be used. Until I found the folder. It was a gray binder in Matthew's old bedroom, wedged behind a pile of books I had left untouched since he moved out. I was searching for a box of his childhood photos to maybe bring to the wedding, something to remind him of where he came from. I was going to be subtle about it, just tuck one into his suit pocket, a quiet mother's gesture. But when I pulled the stack down from the shelf, the binder fell out and spilled open on the floor. Inside were receipts, not normal wedding planning receipts. These were credit card statements, bank withdrawals, wire transfers, most in Matthew's name, a few in Danielle's, and every single one told a story they never intended anyone to read. $7, $8, $100 to a private therapist. $3, $2, $100 to a consulting service in another state. Thousands in legal fees, quiet payments spread out over months. But what caught my eye most was one labeled, "Settlement Agreement Do Not Disclose." It wasn't addressed to Matthew. It was paid by Danielle. The name on the other side of the document, James Hargrove. I didn't recognize it at first, but curiosity got the better of me. I ran a quick online search and nearly dropped my phone. James Hargrove was Danielle's ex-fiancé, the one she never mentioned, the one Chelsea had whispered about at the rehearsal dinner, and the man who, it turns out, had filed a civil suit for fraud and defamation just 1 year before Danielle met Matthew. I read every page of that settlement agreement. James had accused Danielle of faking a pregnancy to manipulate him into marrying her, and when he ended the relationship, she allegedly tried to ruin his business reputation by spreading lies about domestic violence. The settlement included a non-disclosure clause, financial payment, and a signed retraction from Danielle herself. It was all there, and Matthew either didn't know or, worse, knew and stayed silent. That's when the nausea hit. How deep did this go? I reached out to Chelsea again, this time directly. I asked her if she knew about James. There was a long pause in the chat, and then her response came through. Yes, we all did, but Brenda made everyone swear not to bring it up. She said if Danielle got exposed again, it would ruin her chances of a respectable marriage, and Matthew, well, I think he's just too far gone to question anything now. Respectable. That word made my skin crawl. Danielle didn't love my son. She loved what he could do for her, the new image, the reset button, the erasure of her past, her mistakes, her ugly truths. And Matthew, my sweet, bright boy, was too blind to see that he was just the next well-mannered puppet in her long performance. But I saw it now, every detail, every thread. The wedding wasn't just a ceremony. It was a cover-up. I sat on the edge of Matthew's old bed, binder in hand, and looked at the photos still framed on the wall. Him at age 7, holding a science trophy. Him and me, laughing in the kitchen covered in flour. Him on prom night, hugging me tight before walking out the door. That boy, my boy, was still in there somewhere, buried beneath all the polish and control Danielle had wrapped around him like a second skin. But I couldn't reach him with tears anymore. I had tried, I had begged, I had stayed quiet and respectful, and none of it worked, so I would reach him another way, by tearing the mask off Danielle in front of the very people she tried to impress. I made copies of everything in that binder, physical, digital, cloud, stored. I labeled them with color-coded tabs. I compiled a clean summary of Danielle's pattern, past relationships, financial exploitation, false allegations. I even tracked down James Hargrove's public statement, which had been quietly posted on a legal forum for a few days before disappearing into obscurity. But I didn't stop there. I dug into Brenda too. If Danielle had learned how to manipulate and deceive, she had learned it from someone. And sure enough, it didn't take long to find Brenda's name in several local lawsuits, property disputes, unpaid business loans, and one particularly nasty lawsuit involving her firing a housekeeper who later filed for wrongful termination. They were a family built on illusions, and I had the receipts, literally, but the best discovery came last, almost by accident. I was reviewing the seating chart again when I saw a name I didn't recognize. Erica W., no last name, no family relation listed. I asked Chelsea about her. She replied quickly, "Oof, that's Danielle's ex's sister. Not sure why she's invited. Brenda hates her. Maybe it's a bribe thing." That made no sense, unless it wasn't a bribe. It was containment. Erica, as it turned out, had posted a TikTok months earlier hinting at a high-profile wedding involving her brother's ex-fiancé, the one who tried to ruin their family. The video had been taken down, but I tracked down a cached version. Her caption read, "She's lying to everyone, but go off, queen." And just like that, the final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a performance, an image rehab campaign, and I had front row tickets. But more importantly, I now held the full script. They thought inviting me meant I'd keep quiet out of politeness or maybe shame. They believed I'd sit in the corner and clap for the woman who stripped me of my title and made a mockery of motherhood. They were wrong because I was no longer coming as a guest. I was coming as a storm. I didn't rush it. That's the part no one saw coming. I didn't burst through the chapel doors screaming or wave documents in Danielle's face like a lunatic. That's what they wanted me to do, what they expected. Another emotional moment they could twist into proof that I was unstable, bitter, jealous of my son's new family. No, I was done letting them write my part in their little drama. So I got dressed like nothing was wrong. I wore the navy blue dress Danielle once called too outdated for a wedding, paired with the pearl necklace Matthew had given me when he graduated college back when I was still the woman he called first with good news. I curled my hair the way I used to when he was little, and we'd go to church on Sundays. I painted my lips a soft red, not for beauty, but for boldness, because I wasn't coming to this wedding for show. I was coming for war, quiet, clean, and final. The wedding venue was a converted mansion, elegant and modern with rustic charm, according to the invitation. Everything about it was meticulously arranged, from the matching floral arches to the custom white runners printed with Danielle and Matthew's initials in gold script. People buzzed around in expensive outfits, fake laughter echoing off the marble. When I stepped out of my car, heads turned, not because I made a scene, but because I walked with my chin up, like I belonged, because I looked like a mother proud of her son, because I wasn't shaking or crying or clutching tissues like the fragile woman they tried to reduce me to. I handed my invitation to the usher like everyone else, mother of the groom. I said, calmly and clearly. His face twitched in surprise, as if expecting someone else to claim that title, but he led me in without question, seating me in the front row, just behind the altar. Danielle's mother, Brenda, was already seated across the aisle. She froze when she saw me. Her smile flickered just for a second before she leaned into Danielle's father and whispered something in his ear. His eyes narrowed at me. I smiled back, not sweetly but like a woman who knew something he didn't, because I did. I sat down slowly, smoothing my dress, and placed my clutch on my lap. Inside was a small USB drive containing every file, every photo, every receipt, every quote, every statement I had collected, organized, timed, stamped, and backed up 6 different ways. The original binder was locked in a safe. I wasn't reckless, but I also wasn't bluffing. I scanned the room. Chelsea gave me a nod from the bridesmaid row, barely noticeable. She didn't know exactly what I planned, just that I wasn't going to let Danielle get away with it. Not this time. The music began. Everyone stood. Danielle entered like she was floating. Lace, silk, diamonds, she looked like the vision of grace, but I saw it differently now. The dress wasn't white, it was camouflage. The diamonds weren't elegance, they were distractions. She smiled at the crowd, then at Matthew, and for a second I saw it. She really believed she had won. I studied my son's face as she approached. He looked nervous, yes, but not in love. There was a tightness around his mouth, a weight behind his eyes. He glanced briefly at me, then quickly looked away like he couldn't bear to see what he had thrown away. Good, because I wasn't there for reconciliation anymore. I was there for revelation. The ceremony went on with the usual rituals. The officiant gave a flowery introduction. They exchanged over-rehearsed vows. Brenda wiped away fake tears. I sat silently through it all, waiting, calm, unbothered. I wasn't going to interrupt their big moment. I was going to outshine it. Just as the officiant began the final blessing, a man walked up the aisle, tall, clean, shaven, confident. Dressed in a simple black suit, eyes locked on Danielle, her entire body stiffened. It was James Hargrove. I had reached out to him 3 days earlier not to start drama, but to ask for truth. I didn't beg or bribe. I simply told him, the woman who tried to destroy you is about to marry my son. You don't owe me anything, but he deserves to know who she really is. He didn't respond for 2 days. Then he sent one line, tell me where and when, and here he was. Danielle whispered something to Brenda, who immediately stood and tried to block him, but James handed something to the officiant, a sealed envelope, and pointed at the mic. The officiant looked confused, then stepped aside. James walked up to the front, turned to the crowd, and spoke. I apologize for the interruption, but before this ceremony continues, there's something that needs to be heard for the sake of honesty and the future of this couple. Gasps. Confusion, phones raised. Danielle's face turned ghost white. James opened the envelope and began to read. It was his sworn statement from the civil suit, line by line, calmly, without malice. He didn't yell. He didn't attack. He just told the truth about the lies, the pregnancy, the manipulation, the lawsuit. And then he ended with this. You may choose to ignore this. You may even go through with this marriage. But just know, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Good luck. He handed the mic back and walked away. Silence fell, then chaos. Brenda rushed to Danielle's side. The guests murmured, shocked, unsure if it was real. The officiant awkwardly stepped forward, unsure what to do, and Matthew looked like a man who had just woken up inside a nightmare. His eyes darted between Danielle and me. I didn't speak. I didn't rise. I just sat there in the front row and held his gaze, and for the first time in months, I saw the truth dawn across his face. The wedding was over, not because I stopped it, but because I showed him who she really was and let him walk away himself. People always assume that the loudest person in the room is the most dangerous. But sometimes it's the one who sits quietly, who watches, who waits. Danielle thought my silence was weakness. She mistook my patience for submission. And Brenda, that venom-laced woman, believed I was too old, too tired, too irrelevant to matter. Even Matthew, blinded by love, thought I was just being overprotective when I voiced concerns. But I've lived long enough to know that truth always comes home, and when it does, it doesn't knock gently. It kicks the door down. We didn't go back to the reception. There was nothing left to return to. The music had stopped. The guests had thinned out. Danielle was still inside, red, faced and humiliated, clinging to Brenda like a drowning woman clings to driftwood, but the tide had already turned. Chelsea offered to drive us to a small restaurant near by, quiet, classy, and not at all what I'd imagined for that day. But in its simplicity, it became a sacred moment. We didn't need champagne towers or first dances. We needed honesty. Matthew sat across from me with both elbows on the table, his hands laced together like a man still trying to process the wreckage. I really thought she loved me, he finally said. I didn't interrupt him. Letting someone grieve a lie is its own kind of healing. He continued. She said all the right things. She talked about loyalty, family, a future, but she was hiding all of that, the lawsuit, the messages, everything, and she knew if I ever found out, I'd leave. I took a sip of tea, and yet she gambled anyway. He nodded, because she thought I wouldn't believe anyone but her. She thought she'd turn me against you for good. I could have said she almost did. But I didn't. I didn't want him to carry that weight. I'm sorry, Mom. He whispered. I said terrible things to you. I let her paint you as the villain. I told you to stay in your lane when you were just trying to protect me. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. I never needed to be right, Matthew. I just needed you to be safe. His eyes welled up again the fourth time that day, and this time he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, and with every drop, I watched a part of the old him return. We spent the evening laughing, grieving, and slowly stitching our bond back together, but that wasn't the end of the story, not for me, because there was still something I needed to say, and I wasn't going to let the last image people had of me be that of a troublemaker ruining her son's wedding. A few days later, when the photos started circulating and the rumors spun out of control, I got phone calls, texts. Some asked what really happened. Others just wanted drama, but one message stood out. It was from the videographer, Mrs. Delaney. It said, I recorded everything. I haven't deleted a second, but I thought you should know. Danielle's family is trying to have me edit you out. I stared at that message for a long time. Trying to erase me, even after everything, they were still trying to pretend I didn't exist, still trying to rewrite history, filter the truth, and make me disappear like a smudge on glass. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't just walk away. I had to speak. So when the videographer asked if I wanted to include a message in the final, cut something personal, to explain the context, I said yes, but I didn't scream. I didn't rant. I sat down, put on the same pale blue dress I wore to the wedding, and I looked into the camera. I didn't ruin my son's wedding. I began. I saved him from a marriage built on deceit. I spoke plainly, calmly, like a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to raise the stakes. I told them about the lawsuit, the threats, the manipulation, the erasure. I told them about how I sat through dinners where Brenda mocked me for being a single mother, and how Danielle rolled her eyes when I talked about Matthew's childhood. I told them about the mic not as a weapon, but as a chance to be heard. And I ended with this. I wasn't smiling at the wedding because I saw the truth standing at the altar before anyone else did. And when the moment came, I chose to speak not because I wanted revenge, but because I couldn't let my son make a lifetime commitment to a lie. The video went viral. Not on some tabloid gossip site, not in a flashy clickbait article. It was shared by people who had felt voiceless too, single mothers, disrespected elders, estranged parents, women who were told to stay in their lane one too many times, people who had kept quiet to keep the peace and lost themselves in the process. And suddenly, the woman in the blue dress wasn't just Matthew's mother. She was them. Danielle and Brenda tried to spin it, of course. claimed I edited the footage, manipulated the timeline, or had a vendetta. But the evidence was airtight. The screenshots, the voicemail, the testimony from James. Even Danielle's own aunt came forward in a quiet interview, confirming everything I said. They went silent after that. Matthew started therapy. He took time off work and slowly, painfully, began building a life on his own without the lies, without the manipulation. As for me, I didn't become bitter. I didn't gloat. I just kept living, kept loving my son, kept telling my story, not to stay in the spotlight, but to make sure women like me never felt erased again. They wanted me quiet, but I became the one voice no one could ignore.